Hello all, welcome back to Be a Creative. So here it is, the end of our 2 weeks for our little Stay Inside the Lines challenge, and it's time for a super big shout out. Our entries are submitted by Cecil Pug Cox on Instagram. I think that is super cute. This one was submitted by Mini Book Pixie. The neck is genius. Oh my gosh, I love it. Our next entry was submitted by Creativist, and I think the idea with the mountain and the little road is genius. And by Creativist's 7-year-old daughter. The idea with the rainbow is so adorable. So be sure to give everyone who participated a lot of love. Check my stories on Instagram. And thank you so much for participating. Be sure to let me know in the comments below if that's something that you may want to continue. And I promise that I will make the inside area that we stay in bigger next time, because that was hard for me too. Speaking of hard, I am making some Mother's Day tags in this video, and they're for my mother-in-law, my mother, and one of my best friends. And this was a little hard for me. It was challenging because they all have very different tastes, and they all included working in a color palette that I don't typically work in. I'm starting by creating the background for the tag for my mother-in-law. By laying down some Distress Oxide spray ink and Distress Oxides, I just smushed them right on my little pad, as you just saw. Now I'm doing what I believe is called the smushing effect. Tim Holtz was my gateway drug into mixed media, so I actually have a lot of his products because for about, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes I entertained the notion that I was going to be a card maker. Nope, that is not for Shannon. There's a lot of detail and a lot of measuring that goes into card making that is not for me. So as you can see, I'm just smushing and dragging the tag through his inks. I am drying that with a heat gun between each layer, and when you work with oxides, that's always a really good idea because of the way that they're formulated. The colors will lay right over top of each other. I laid down colors in greens and browns and added just a little bit of blue to kind of brighten it up a little bit. Now I'm going to run it through a 3D embossing die in the wood grain, and you can just see just a little bit the embossing. That 3D embossing and die gives a nice impression, but you really have to kind of do what I'm doing here to pull out the texture. I have some of his Distress Oxides and peeled paint, and I'm using my finger going right over top of the embossed texture areas. I'm using my finger instead of a dauber for this because I don't want to apply too much pressure and wind up smushing it down onto the background that I had just created. So by using my finger, I'm able to stay right over top of the surface and really highlight all that texture from the embossing folder. Now it's time to start working on my best friend's tag. My best friend is like super into shiplap, and I wasn't really sure what that was, so I watched a couple hours of this home improvement show by Joanna Gaines. Apparently she's the queen of shiplap, and I got a good sense of what it was. So I'm using some Dina Wakley heavy body acrylics, an elephant, and I believe, you know what, I don't know the name of that. Check the description box below for a list of the full supplies. I'm using those two colors with my finger, and I'm just kind of scrubbing it onto the tag. I didn't gesso this tag first because I didn't want a nice bright white background. Shiplap is a type of wood paneling that was used in a lot of homes in Texas, and my best friend really likes that style, like the country farmhouse look. So I figured these two color choices kind of gave the appearance of shiplap, like a weathered wood type effect that was different than the weathered wood I literally just did with the first tag. I just realized that. So I'm going to set that aside to dry, and now I'm going to start on the background for my mom's tag. We have very similar tastes, but my mom does like things that are just a little bit more subdued, but she does like color. So I decided to pull out my gel plate. And as you can see, I have a couple of warm-up prints going. I don't know, I just couldn't get like a really good print. I didn't have a good idea of what I was going for. It was more of like, you know what, I'll know it when I see it type of things. That wasn't it when I saw that. That wasn't it at all. However, after playing for a little bit and pulling some of those warm-up prints, I finally figured out what I wanted to do. So I had some of that leftover paint through that first stencil, and now I'm applying some turquoise through a Holtz stencil. I don't know the name. And I'm hoping at the time that I'm pulling this, I'm hoping that it's going to give me the look that I don't yet know what I want, but I know what I don't want. So I'm thinking this is the one. So I'm going to be very careful not to put any paint on the back of the tag, which is why I'm using a piece of paper to brayer it. And there we go. That's what I'm looking for, even though I just realized that in the moment. So now I have all 3 of my backgrounds made, and we're going to start working on building them up. This was fairly simple to do. That is a Concord and Ninth stamp from, again, my card making days. I think I used it once, and it was very fortuitous. It was entitled Shiplap, which was basically just lines. So if you wanted to recreate this, you could totally do this with a ruler. I just cannot draw a straight line, even with a ruler and my grid, to save my life. I'm using Hickory Smoke archival ink to give the impression of, the faded wood. And I think I pulled it off. I liked it. It's nice. So now I'm going to use my paper edge distresser, and I'm going to really distress the edges of that because I have an idea of what I want to do with this tag. And I need the edges really nice and distressed so that when I ink them later, you're going to be able to see the contrast of it. Just a heads up though, if you're thinking about getting that paper distresser, it does leave like shavings of paper all over everything. So be mindful of that. Now I'm starting on the focal point from my mother-in-law's tag, and you can see I have the tag just set to the side for a little inspiration as I'm doing my bee. That's a bee from a Dina Wakley stamp set, and I'm going to set it aside to dry because I stamped it on vellum. Whoops, sorry. I stamped it on vellum, and because that's a non-porous surface, it can take a little bit for it even stays on to dry, so that's what that was. Now I'm working on the focal point for my best friend's tag. That's a stamp from an older Dina Wakley flower stamp set, and I haven't used it in a while, and I really missed it, and I thought that it would look nice against the shiplap. I have some of her scribble sticks that I'm using to just basically color in the stamp, like so. Once I get that good and colored in, I went back with a carnation, I think that was the name of the scribble stick, and just added a couple highlights. Now I'm using olive to fill in the branch, and I didn't wet that actually, I just colored it in really hard. So I've cut that out, and now you can see I have some white space that I don't know. I did entertain the notion of using my X-Acto knife to try to cut that out, but I figured that had disaster written all over it. So I'm going back in with the same purple, and I'm very lightly just tinting that background because I realized the foreground where the flowers are so dark that if I use a lighter color in the background, it'll all kind of blend in and make it look like it's not just white space. Now we're going back to the other focal point. Sorry if this is really disorganized. This is how I craft when I'm just playing, and so welcome to my world. It's kind of crazy. Now I'm going back to that original focal point from my mother-in-law's tag, and I used the colors Marine, Quinacridone, Golden Nickel, and just plain white paint to paint in that bee. I'm modeling this off of a tag that I did like 7 or 8 months ago, and I just loved how the bee looked, and I thought it would work really well against the wood grain. Now I'm making the focal point for my mother's tag, so I'm going to be using that stamp set with these gel plate prints to create by collage what you're getting ready to see here. This. It looks like an ice cream cone just hanging there. I just tore up the pieces and then glued them all down. I've set that aside to dry, and now I'm going back to finish my best friend's tag. I have a little piece of cheesecloth, and I'm trying to figure out how to work that into the tag. Rolling it up was not an option, so I was like, nope, that's not what I want to do. So I decided to just kind of unravel a little bit, and I'm like, could it really be this simple to just stick it down, like right in the middle? Yes, people, yes, it can really be that simple. I left this part in, even though it's just me gluing, because I struggle gluing stuff like this down sometimes, and maybe somebody else does too. This is how I do it. I just use a whole bunch of gel medium and then put the cheesecloth or ribbon or whatever it is right over top of it. But I don't do everything because I want some of the edges to kind of stay loose. Then I use my large acrylic block to press everything down. Now we're going to, am I going to adhere it? Maybe? Yes. Okay. So, I'm sorry. Now I'm trying to figure out how to finish off my mother-in-law's tag. I had originally thought that I would put some book paper behind the bee, but not really feeling that. So I have a piece of acetate that I found when I was cleaning out my craft room, and I'm going to stamp right over top of it with a script stamp with Stays On ink, because I'm thinking something really bright and kind of shiny would look nice behind the bee. I did stamp it twice with a circle just in case, because I like options when I'm in the moment. So while that is drying, I'm going back to my mother's focal point. God, this is like, I'm all over the place. I'm stamping right over top of that collaged image with one of the flowers from the Always Flowers set. I think that's the name of it. I'm going to cut that out, and then that's simply what I'm going to use for the focal point. I probably could have gone back in and done a little bit more with the leaves, but I really liked the gold that was popping through. So I do feel like the tag needs just a little bit something going on in the background, but I didn't want it to overpower it. I watched Tim Holtz' demo last Saturday, and he gave the suggestion of using his distress gloss, no, what the hell are they called? Distress embossing glazes with some of his transparent texture paste. So that's what I was doing. I just had some of his transparent texture paste, ran it through a Dina Wakley stencil, and now I'm covering it up with antique linen. That could be the name of it. I don't know. It's a crapshoot at this point. And then I'm just I'm going to set it aside to dry. His instructions were to put the embossing glazes over the texture paste, let the texture paste dry, and then heat set it. So that's what I'm doing. I think it took about 15 minutes or so for the texture paste to dry, and then like I just said 3 times, I heat set it. So now I'm going back to my mother-in-law's tag, and I'm going to apply the back plate, I guess you could say, to my little bee. And I'm starting with the script. I was really wanting the script to work, but it just didn't. I don't know. I think the design, there's 2 different styles, and it just couldn't really make it work. This, however, totally worked, and I'm really glad that I had the foresight to stamp twice. See what having choices can do. I didn't have to stop what I was doing and rethink my whole plan. I am trying to figure out how to glue this down, though. This is the first time I've ever worked with acetate, and I'm assuming that since gel medium will dry clear, if I just put the gel medium over the really dark spots, it will dry clear and you won't see it. I assumed correctly. So that time my assumption worked instead of what normally happens. So now I'm making a little back plate for the sentiment too, because the wood grain is kind of strong and I just didn't want it to eat anything that I put down. I have the sentiment from that bee stamp set, Use Your Wings, and that's my mother-in-law's tag all done. So now I'm finishing off the tag for my best friend, and this is a little different than what I normally do. I typically just send tags as cards. That's just, I just like making tags. However, my best friend is a bit more of a traditionalist, and I also wanted to write a message to her, so I need a little bit more space. So I literally just glued the tag down to a 5x7 card base, which also gives me enough room to apply the sentiment like how I want, because there also wasn't enough room to really send a nice message. So I chose the sentiment from that's Always Flowers stamp set, I think. I don't know. Again, check the description box. So that was it. That was super simple. And now I'm finishing off my mom's tag. I wanted to break up the background just a little bit, so I have a torn up piece of music paper that I've glued down. I've added some foam adhesives to both the focal point flower and the little sentiment bloom, because that's what my mom is doing right now. She's kind of coming to her season and she's blooming. And here we have the finished Mother's Day tags. Be sure to let me know in the comments below which one is your favorite. I really like that bee one. I think that's my favorite. Alright guys, that covers it. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time.